Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, Greg Anthony here, and glad you're back on the Investigative Journal on this March 7th, 2017 day on our calendar. And I've got Leo Zagami on the line with me from Rome, Italy. And Leo comes on every couple of weeks to update us on what's going on in the Vatican and certain things. And if you even go back in my shows, we started talking over 11 years ago. A lot of the things that we've talked about the Vatican connection between the United States, the European Union, the leaders of the world have come true. And we're watching it play out right before our very eyes. Now, the thing I wanted to talk about is Donald Trump came into power in America on the theme of getting rid of ISIS and terrorism. And Americans don't realize how far back this story goes and how far back really it goes to show you the connection between the Vatican and terrorism, how they initiated it, and how it started over something called Operation Gladio. Now, we've talked a lot about that over the years, Leo, and I want to give you some facts for the American listeners to understand that when I was in Rome in the 80s and then met you afterwards, Europe was the first test pilot, I think, here in their strategy of tension. And I think people need to understand this because it all initiated the CIA, all of this became facts in the Vatican. This all started with after World War II. And I wanted to read you these facts so people really understand that Europe has been the first test pilot, and now it's America. After Richard Nixon became president in '69, the strategy of tension in Europe gained more impetus. National advisor Henry Kissinger issued orders to Licio Gelli, who me and Leo have talked about much, and we're going to touch on that a bit, to carry out terror attacks and coup attempts. Many people in America never knew who Licio Gelli was till we brought it up 11 years ago. The United States and the Vatican channeled millions of dollars for these operations. Most of the money was raised in questionable ways, and that's what we've talked about here for the last decade. The first major attack in Europe took place on December 12, 1969, when a bomb went off in the lobby of the Banco Nazionale di Agricoltura in Milan, Italy. 17 people died in the explosion. Within an hour, 3 bombs exploded in Rome. According to official figures, 14,591 acts of violence with political motivation took place in Europe between January 1, 1969 and December 31, 1987. In these terror attacks, they estimate nearly 500 people died, 1,200 people were injured. A large number of terror attacks took place in other European countries from 1965 to 1981. After a series of assassination attempts to kill French President de Gaulle failed, he denounced the secret warfare of the Pentagon and expelled the European headquarters of NATO. Leo, I just wanted to present that to you so people understand what Europe has been under. And when you talk about all of the connections, boy, you've got a background that many people in America don't have. So tell us, if I'm a little bit, what you thought about what I just said. Am I on the right track?
No, well, I mean, it's a very complex series of events that took place that we first described, let's say, in an alternative way, positioning the Vatican as the head of this new world order, while instead most researchers, I guess 11 years ago, were focusing more on other parts, other tentacles of the beast, let's say. And this was for us, I guess, very daring. Not everybody at that time, as you remember very well, supported this view that we had, that at the peak of it, there was, however, always the Vatican, the Jesuits, and when they eventually, like we saw in 2013, came up with the first Jesuit Pope, definitely things became more and more clear. I think that this is what's happening in the last 3 to 4 years. Things that we have predicted for a long time will come into place, will come into fruition, really literally manifested in front of everybody. And of course, initially people might get tricked into the Pope Francis Bonarian attitude with his friendly face, looking like a comedian, kind of, when he wants to really. And then we see instead that behind the scenes, this Pope is a very harsh Pope, is a Pope that is very strong in his decisions to implement this liberation for the church, this, of course, going against all the dogmas, and of course putting the Jesuit twist to the whole thing right into the hands of the New World religion that is being crafted by the New World Order, which is really the plan that they had from the start. So they are really working on destroying any legitimacy from the Catholic Church, and they're managing very well. At the same time, their New World Order, thanks to the so-called Muslim fundamentalism, this Muslim extremism that they have been able to manipulate behind the scenes very well, made the whole thing remember us of the strategy of tension that was in place like Italy in Europe, but not only Italy. They had been in that period, as you know, in the 70s, the whole of Europe, particularly Italy, because it was the home of Gladio, was the testing ground for this new strategy of tension. It was orchestrated back then by terrorist groups that, of course, had an ideology that wasn't the ideology of today. Today, the ideology is a religious ideology that brainwashes the individuals and makes them kill themselves in the name of Allah, of their God. And back then, it was the communist or vice versa, the right-wing extremists and the fascists opposing each other in this game of opposites, which of course was manipulated behind the scenes by the CIA, by certain intelligence agencies that were interested. Also the Mossad had, as you know, a big say in what Licio Gelli used to do. But ultimately, Licio Gelli was a knight of the Vatican. He was a member of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Holy Sepulchre has been for many years, many decades, this very powerful structure within the church, which a lot of also very powerful Freemasons joined, just like it happened in the Knights of Malta. Now, we saw in the past episodes of our radio shows in the last few weeks what happened with the Knights of Malta. They have been attacked by Pope Francis because, of course, Pope Francis seems to have understood that behind the Knights of Malta and the Knights of Columbus, that are the ones who really dominate and control the Knights of Malta, and they are very influential, as you know, in the US, the Knights of Columbus. Well, these knighthoods are, of course, full of Freemasons, and for Pope Francis now, Freemasonry is not necessarily a good thing, because branches of Freemasonry have decided to side with Donald Trump, with the Christian values that, of course, he's claiming to protect, but also we know that Donald Trump has a very close relationship also with Israel, and Freemasons, traditionally very close to Israel, see that as a very positive thing. So the Jesuits find themselves having to put under investigation through the orders of the Pope the whole structure of the Knights of Malta, something that is unprecedented in Vatican history, as you know, Greg. Mm-hmm. And of course, the repercussions are enormous when we know that up until 3 years ago, when actually Pope Francis came into effect after his election, there had been a very big anniversary celebration for the Knights of Malta, but at the same time there had been a big scandal in the Vatican Bank, the IOR, which put in charge of the whole Vatican Bank, the Knights of Malta, that at that point, through this German weapon dealer, because he's a guy who is apparently fabricating battleships, became in charge of the Vatican Bank. Now, then he was put aside, he was made to step down. Why all this happened? Because it became very evident that the Knights of Malta, large parts of the Knights of Malta, were openly endorsing and supporting Donald J. Trump through also meetings that were held thanks to the NIAF, which is basically the association that puts together the Italo-Americans with their counterparts also in Italy. And the supporters, of course, that for the NIAF, they were predominantly and are predominantly Republican by extraction, and so they supported very much the possible election of Donald J. Trump. All this, of course, is not good for Pope Francis, who is, as we have always said, the ultimate controller of this New World Order, which looks more and more like a New World disorder. So what's happening now? The last few weeks, Pope Francis is particularly criticized also for not being really very strong against the pedophilia problem in the Vatican, for being a little bit mild, for not having taken the right decisions, and actually changing some of the laws to make it even more difficult for the Italian authorities to investigate these pedophilia cases in the church. So at the same time, somebody who came with the Pope to the US during that visit that we all remember, historical visit, Greg, I'm sure that you remember it, because it wasn't that long ago that he even stood in front of Congress. And really, for the first time in history, we saw how powerful the Vatican is in the US. It was blatant, it was literally obvious for everybody that the Pope could block an entire US city, and that's, and nobody would say anything about it. Together with the Pope Francis, there was this other guy called Monsignor Paglia, who is responsible for the Pontifical Council for the Family. And this guy here, who actually celebrated Mass in Philadelphia with Pope Francis, is very criticized lately because he overseed and he sponsored the painting of a supposedly a Christian painting, but it's not really a Christian painting because it would be a blasphemy to call it like this. Vincenzo Paglia, basically, who is and supposedly is in charge of life and family issues for the Vatican, created a mural with this Argentinian gay painter where Jesus is shown saving the prostitutes, the transsexuals, the drug addicts, the whole show, and bringing them all up to heaven with him. I don't know, it's very particular. It's definitely something unusual for this mural, which covers the inside of important cathedral in the Diocese of Terni Narni Amelia, which is basically in Umbria. And so the fact that behind all this is a guy like Vincenzo Paglia means really where Pope Francis is pushing this church towards something that is an acceptance of all these transgressions and the possibility of being always forgiven. So I guess that this Jesus carrying to heaven these nets filled with naked and semi-nude homosexual, transsexual, prostitutes, drug dealers, all jammed together in erotic interactions is really the Babylon the church is today. It's pretty shocking, don't you think, Greg?
Yeah, I didn't. And now this is in Umbria, you said?
Well, the painting is made by this homosexual Argentinian named Riccardo Cinalli. He's an artist. He's very well known for his paintings of male bodies. And Monsignor Paglia, I repeat, who is in charge of basically the family values for the Catholic Church, chose this artist to paint the salvation scene inside his church, in his cathedral. I mean, it's pretty shocking, and I think that there will be a lot more people talking about it in the next few days. But already there is an interesting article that came out on livesitenews.com, which is entitled Vatican Archbishop featured in homoerotic painting he commissioned, which I suggest people should go and check out, because I think that all this really confirms what we have been saying for years, Greg. The fact that they wanted to change the values of the church, but we never expected, of course, these values to actually be put there inside the church under the form of a mural, which, I mean, it's like bringing down again, Michelangelo and asking him to paint again the whole Sistine Chapel by putting hookers, drag queens, drag addicts, and whatever, and all together led to heaven by Jesus. Of course, this is a nice thought, but we know also that Catholic doctrine doesn't really associate those kind of people with heaven, but with hell. It's very clear about it. I mean, Dante Alighieri wrote a book that, as you know, defined the Inferno and inspired even another book and a bad movie, which is, of course, Dan Brown's Inferno. And so I think that it's very important for us to understand that the values of this Church of Pope Francis are really diluting the Church to something that is no more or less is satanic to all effects.
Yeah, exactly.
We cannot hide that.
You know, the one thing that's brought to mind when you were talking is that it seems that in politics in countries all over the world, in Europe, in America, you're seeing such a division between the left and the right, and you're seeing the same thing in the Vatican, a split, a schism, creating such tension and anger. We're seeing here now people are fighting in the streets over Trump's policies. And the thing I wanted to mention was that when I brought up Licio Gelli, okay, in the beginning, I know you know him very well. He passed away recently. But to me, that explained the tension, or that explained how America was connected to the Vatican through the CIA. Because even if you look at pictures of Ronald Reagan's inauguration, Licio Gelli was right there behind him. And that's what I wanted.
I actually...
Go ahead.
Actually published in volume 2 of my Confessions a letter that Licio Gelli sent to Ronald Reagan. It's in volume 2 of my Confessions, which is published by CCC Publishing in San Francisco, and you can find it in every bookstore. And I suggest you get this book, because I included some interesting documents to confirm these things which are said by us, but it's important also that people, Greg, see the evidence so they can, then they can't deny it. It's there in front of their eyes.
And so we have the United States funding both sides of this tension back then between communism and anti-communist forces, terrorism. And the same thing is happening now, but they're using Islam. So what's happened since Gelli has died and left? Because he was a major player in Italy, and we know everything started there in Rome. What's happened since then? Because you knew him well, were involved with these organizations, and went on another path. So explain to our listeners, we got 6 minutes on this side of the break, and then we can continue, but how things have changed since the strategy of tension now has slipped over to fighting ISIS and Islam, radical Islam.
Well, when it comes down to Licio Gelli, let me tell you that in the last couple of weeks, a new investigation came to life, an investigation that is being issued by the Anti-Mafia Commission that is investigating lodges in south of Italy, in particular in Calabria and Sicily. It's of course something that hasn't happened for many years. There had been the P2 scandal, then we had another scandal in the early 90s with another investigation from the Procuratore di Palmi, I think it was called Cordova, in 1993. And now we have another investigation in the illegal activities of Freemasonry. So they have forced now, a week ago, most of the major lodges, the major obediences of Freemasonry, the Grand Orient of Italy, the regular Grand Lodge of Italy, and the Vitelleschi, to give their list of Freemasons. They didn't want to give this list, so they were forced by an executive order and by a direct arrival to each lodge and to each archive from the Guardia di Finanza special unit, which basically broke into their archives and had to take their names, because they had been warned for 1 month. Most lodges in Calabria and Sicily knew this, but none of the big obediences, I'm not even talking here about the irregular lodges, because they of course couldn't care less about what the Anti-Mafia Commission does, but I'm saying the regular lodges, for some reason, still now, they don't want to give out their names. And this is a big problem. So I was in Sicily last week myself. I went to Sicily for a very important Masonic meeting that was held in Catania, where I took the position together with the other Grand Masters who came there from, of course, minority obediences, because we are in all probably 1,200 Masons. But compared to the 24,000, 23,000 of the other obediences. But I can say that the people who came there to Sicily, I convinced them all, and they were already convinced also by the fact that their main Grand Master agreed with me completely. And because for the first time, imagine this, Greg, we started this adventure in 2006. For the first time in the history of Freemasonry, in Calabria, in this event that took place in Calabria, the Grand Master who was conducting all the other Grand Masters present for this Grand Lodge meeting of this council called the Concilium Maximum, he basically said it completely in the open. He condemned both Satanism and the mafia infiltrations of the lodges. And he was very adamant of doing this. And I mean, a guy, he's called Corrado Labisi, and he was very courageous to do that, especially in Sicily, especially in front of all these Freemasons. But I must say that all the Masons and lodges that came from around Sicily and from around Italy, and even some from abroad for this event, I was treated very well. Some Masons, imagine, that I met there, wanted to clarify their position on the basis of certain things that I have written on them that were not very nice. So I found myself in front of the enemy again. You understand? By going back into the fold, Greg. Sooner or later, I will face them. But the crazy thing here was that they came to me saying, okay, we can give you some better information. If you want, you can verify it, so then you can understand better certain realities of certain lodges and certain disinformation about others. But by giving me access to more verifiable kind of information, you understand, more serious witness and archives that are inaccessible. And I must say that this is good, because they are criticizing, of course, maybe initially the modality in which I started my war, but then in the end they understood that it was the right modality, because it brought out of the closet all this garbage that is important that we clean all this stuff if we want to have something positive coming out of Freemasonry. So Corrado Labisi, on the 25th of February...
Leo, do me a favor. Leo, do me a favor. We have to take a break right now. We'll pick up right where we left off with Leo Zagami. We're talking with Leo from Rome regarding the one world order, the one world government, one world religion, and how it's coming to fruition, as we talked about 10 years ago. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the Supreme Jesuit Command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this March 7th, 2017 day on our calendar. My guest is Leo Zagami from Rome. And I think something, I'm a simple guy, Leo, and I want to try to get to the bottom of this because there's a lot of confusion regarding Freemasonry, the connections of the Vatican, our U.S. presidents, many of which are Freemasons, and their goals, whether all of them are evil, all are good. And talking about Freemasonry, we look at Licio Gelli. Okay, we talked about him. He was the head of the famous P2 Lodge. And we know what the P2 Lodge was all about, not about good things. And you knew Gelli very well, were involved with them.
I must say, when it comes down to not good things, it was things that were ordered to these people that came from a hierarchy in charge that demanded those things to be done in order to preserve Europe from communism. So, in reality, if you see it in the eyes of the beholder, the guys who were in charge of it, they were actually doing a patriotic duty. So it's very difficult now, but it's more easy maybe for us because we're more detached. I at least wasn't I was, of course, member of Monte Carlo Lodge, but years after, as you know, the P2 scandal erupted, and years after Freemasonry was already put under investigation for all these scandals, but at the same time, I saw that they wanted to change within. Then I saw that it was impossible because, as you remember, at one point I started this public appeal, this public coming out with all my secrets from these secret societies, because I was searching also for a way to survive. That moment was very difficult for me. If you remember, Greg, the first months when we started this.
And I think if I could say something that confused people, was I considered you a whistleblower of Freemasonry, and then as your story unfolded, you began to say, well, I'm still a Freemason, and people were confused. And just on today's show, you said, I went to this Masonic meeting.
Sure,
so people have to So let me...
I think that the problem was then that people, between 2006 and 2008, I came out with all this information, and I wanted to detach completely from the Masonic network. But if you remember well, and you were witness to these events yourself in 2008, in fact, we got in problems even between you and me because of this. I made it clear to everybody that I was going back into the fold because outside simply there was not the tools to fight this war. So it was impossible for somebody from outside, what I defined as the Illuminati network, call it the New World Order, call it as you wish, but this network of secret societies, of course, with also Freemasonry.
Are you there?
Because everybody knows Freemasonry, but it's a society with secrets, which is a little bit different. And of course, at the beginning, when I started this battle, I made a lot of enemies within Freemasonry, so it was impossible for me to even go back into the fold, if you understand, Greg, because a lot of people wanted to literally kill me. No?
Right, I remember, yeah.
Shifted so deep into characters like George Ugo Balestrieri, who after ended up arrested, characters like Rui Gabirro, Roberto Amato, many dark figures also of the underworld of Freemasonry that were not really publicly known in any way. The Ordo Templi Orientis and their infiltration within Freemasonry, many other things that I also described in the last few years, also thanks to my books in a more detailed manner. But at that time, I was simply trying to come out of all this, and I wanted to make people know this in case also something happened to me. So I was kind of making a point also to preserve my own life, no? Because if I put these things on the internet, then at that point they become public dominion, and at that point there is no way they can kill me anymore. For that reason, it's more easy to come out and tell everything in a certain way, because at that point your enemy knows that you are really up for, you're not able to be recovered in any way, because you are literally breaking. They tried at one point, if you remember, in December 2006 to invite me down to Livorno, the guys from the P2 and the Monte Carlo Lodge, to try to see if I could still reason with them. And then later on, if you remember, in 2008, once I was back from the United States, at that point I think we actually stopped working, me and you, collaborating also for these interviews, because you didn't really understand at that point why I was so involved within Freemasonry still.
Right.
Go ahead. It was easy for somebody who doesn't know this world from the outside to think of it as a Unitarian monolithic society, but it's nothing like it. It's more like a normal government where you have a lot of political parties, normal parliament, where you have a lot of political parties, and they each have their own ideas. Let's say that Freemasonry is fragmented into various lines of thought, Of course, the predominant one is the one that is working for a new world order and a one world religion, and is the one, of course, that works hand in hand with the Jesuits.
Which you are not a part of, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely two different ways of viewing Freemasonry, and actually we are in a sort of war with each other, or we simply ignore each other. But most of the times the conflicts are growing, because the thing is this: while 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I came out in the public with these confessions of an Illuminati, it was a shocking thing, but not many people believed in me. Now it's different. Now there is whole parts of Freemasonry, and myself also, who are in charge of a Masonic obedience, who have basically the right to say, well, we want to have Christian Freemasonry, we want to have Christian values, we want to have anything to do with occultism or with the dark side, and we don't want to have anything to do with the New World Order, because politically speaking, we believe in the sovereignty of each country. We know that when you take the Masonic oath, you actually take a Masonic oath when you are an Emperor's Masons, which actually is based on the sovereignty of your country, that you have to respect the laws of in a very scrupulous way as a Freemason. So this transformation of Freemasonry into a more mondialist club is very evident in the biggest forms of Freemasonry. Like in Italy, we have the Grand Orient of Italy, which was the one that actually gave birth to the P2. And the Grand Orient of Italy now instead went from being, the P2 was rather fascistic with very right-wing values. Ricciardelli was a kind of also connected to Repubblica Sociale. He had been...
he was close to Mussolini, wasn't he?
He was very close to Mussolini. He became a member of the Secret Service of Mussolini. He worked after he came back from the war in Spain, no? Mm-hmm. The war that saw him fight basically for Franco. And then at that point, for Mussolini, he asked Mussolini to basically join the Secret Service, and he was capable then, after the war, of passing, like many others like him, a lot of SS, a lot of officers of the Reich and also of the fascists that passed directly with the CIA, because they had to fight the common enemy, which was communism. This is really what we have to understand, Greg, is that when we are going to analyze the P2 now, we have to understand we are analyzing a piece of history, no? Mm-hmm. Now that Ricciardelli is dead, and that the Cold War, technically speaking, if we don't want to bring it back, because that's what they're trying to do with Russia, unfortunately, but the Cold War should be over, and so we should view it more like with the detached eyes of a historian. And that's how sometimes I like to view it, because now I had the opportunity to live it on myself. I saw many things, but I also saw that Ricciardelli, in the last few years before he died, he was trying to change his view of Freemasonry, because he understood that he himself had been manipulated by the Illuminati elite and by the Vatican.
So what you're saying is there's certain lodges that practice the occult, subscribe to a more of a globalistic view, and there's other lodges that are opposed to that, correct?
Not only the ones that subscribe to the occult are closer to this liberal agenda, but also the ones who are completely atheistic, who don't have any kind of occult belief, the ones that are very pragmatic. They are, because when you don't have any belief, then at that point you are closer to a Satanist. It's easier to accept a Satanist. This is what happens. You understand, Greg?
Yeah.
It's like the values of Christianity within Freemasonry have kind of fallen since 1813, because before 1813 you could only be a Christian. Freemasonry was open only to Christians until 1813. And up until then, there was no misunderstanding within Freemasonry. It was quite easy to say that most Freemasons were Christians. Then, gradually speaking, we had the birth in 1877 of the irregularity of the Grand Orient of France, who changed the landmarks and said that you could be an atheist and you didn't have to believe in God. And that's really what became the home of communism, because it's from the Grand Orient of France that then the Grand Orient of the Russian people with Lenin, Trotsky, all these people, you see, got educated by liberal Freemasonry, which wasn't necessarily occultistic, but was at times rather pragmatic, but definitely conspirational also in nature, because it took a lot from the Illuminati of Bavaria, the school of the Illuminati of Bavaria, which taught a certain form of infiltration, and then they created, of course, authoritarian states like the Soviet Union that then persecuted Freemasonry. So they kind of like just serve the scope, serve the purpose.
Right. A question I think people would ask would be, how did Freemasonry spread to Islam? Because you can go to Islamic countries and you can see the Quran on a Freemasonry, on their mantle.
I told you, after 1813, the Duke of Sussex, after the great change that was made and decided by the Duke of Sussex, and so by the English court at whole that are in charge traditionally of Freemasonry, we can say that then gradually all the religions that were present in the Commonwealth, as you know, the Great British Empire that then after became the Commonwealth, because Great Britain was an empire, Greg.
Right.
It was an expanding empire. That saw also the opium trade, the tea trade. I mean, Great Britain has a very big role in this New World Order, of course, and they were also, let's say, the ones who spread certain forms of Satanism, because in Victorian England, the Golden Dawn was born. In Victorian England, basically, Aleister Crowley was born.
Right.
And Theosophy, which, as you know, was founded by Madame Blavatsky, became the tool used by Satanic and Luciferian Freemasonry to break into the minds of Freemasons and making them accept this new world religion, which had elements of basically syncretic elements coming from all religions, and so breaking also the traditional view of Christianity. And that's why it was within the Theosophic milieu that Aleister Crowley was born, and Aleister Crowley then brought Satanism to a new level, a level of experimentation with demons, as we know, with Aleister Crowley. Now, this is really the school of Satanism that the liberals, Hillary Clinton follows, and John Podesta. They follow this kind of Satanism, which is modern Satanism, born with Aleister Crowley, developed also in a more Hollywood manner by Anton LaVey.
And you would include Pope Francis in this group, right?
Absolutely, Pope Francis is in this group because, as I also describe in my book, Pope Francis, the Last Pope, ? He has an episcopal lineage which comes down to a cardinal, which was basically a member of the OTO. This I know, it's Mariano Rampolla del Tintero, and people can go and check on Google, putting next to him Ordo Templi Orientis and Freemasonry, and they will see that I'm not lying about this. So the episcopal lineage, which basically is where you basically get your consecration, your legitimacy. You understand what I mean?
Right.
Because it's a bit of a particular concept for somebody who is not actually into this kind of things, because for a Freemason, actually initiation is part of a sort of lineage, and then in the higher levels actually it becomes an episcopal lineage. That's why in Freemason, in the upper levels of certain rites, you have even a link to the church with some Freemasons becoming themselves bishops in the closet of their lodges. Mm-hmm. And they're actually giving communion and all kinds of things that are unimaginable. But I'm not necessarily here talking about the form of Christianity that we understand as being, but more a Gnostic interpretation that often leads then to an interpretation which is sexual of the mysteries of the Mass, but also of Freemasonry. So there is, and that leads to sexual magic and, of course, a whole range of things. That's why we saw that a lot of people discuss these things regarding the Illuminati and sexual magic, but then they don't really understand why they're so important. They're important because they generate energy that these people use, and they also subjugate their tools for propaganda. That's how they subjugate the Hollywood stars. The Hollywood stars are literally, Greg, and I'm sorry to say this on the radio, sucking on Satan's cock.
Yeah, I think many people understand that here, yeah.
This is how it is. So, I mean, I know its representation is a little bit harsh, a bit vulgar, but unfortunately it's how it is. We have these zombified anti-Trump people from Hollywood that are literally, it's impossible to change their minds because they have been brainwashed by this liberal propaganda 24 hours a day since they were born, most of them.
Okay, so let me ask you this question because I think people would be interested. So you go down to this Masonic meeting, knowing how powerful this group is, this group we just talked about in Freemasonry. Why do they let you guys survive? How do you survive? It's followers and people like you who don't believe in their views.
Okay. We survive by siding with the law. So, for example, the guy who directed the works, Corrado Labisi, who is a professor, who's going to become on the 11th the head of a university, he has several anti-mafia organizations in Sicily, and he does it because he's a very powerful man, but he doesn't fear the mafia, and he did a conference with Nicola Gratteri, who is one of the biggest Italian magistrates at the moment, who wrote this book, which basically writes all the links between Freemasonry and the Calabrian mafia and the Sicilian one. And also there is lately also links that have been brought forward with Licio Gelli in regards to a series of things. But, of course, these names, some of them we know already because a guy who used to be in charge of all this in Calabria, we know him very well, was George Ugo Balestrieri. But in the new investigations that are coming out now in the open regarding what's happening in Calabria, is that there is, of course, a series of lodges that work in the dark, siding with the New World Order and crafting the ruling elite of what is the mafia. Because the mafia, of course, doesn't want to, is not only the one we see going around shooting, but it's even more dangerous when it's made out of lawyers, dogs, that are sitting in powerful lodges, conspiring, and then making and having, imagine, controlling the mob. The mob is controlled by lodges of the New World Order.
Okay.
This now needs to be investigated.
Okay.
There is a link, especially between a group of Freemasons in Calabria. They denominate the special group that is linked then to the 'Ndrangheta, which is the Calabrian mafia. They call them La Santa, the Saint. And this is a special group that apparently directs these things. Now, all this has been written by this magistrate to publish this book, and our Grand Master had even the courage to actually organize for him the book presentation in Enna, which is like one of the worst mafiosi towns in Sicily. But just to understand that our grandmasters, and of course I am very proud to have gone to Sicily officially this time, invited by them to witness this great change, because these people want transparency, and the members of these lodges are not the crooks, but they are the police forces, the lawyers, the honest doctors, the honest people of Sicily who are fed up with this situation. And Corrado Labisi making himself publicly condemning the satanic infiltrations and the mafia infiltrations of Freemasonry, I think is unprecedented, and I think is a great start for a new beginning in Freemasonry, if I must say so. No, don't you think, Greg?
Yeah, interesting. And you know something, Leo? We have 2 minutes left. And I'm going to present a question, and basically we're going to do this in next week or the following week. But here in America, there's been a lot of research on Donald Trump. Who is Donald Trump? Is he a Freemason? What side of Freemasonry is he on? I notice every time he gives a sit-down speech, you can see him making the inverted pyramid. Now, nobody's really made connections between any lodges he's involved with, but his family background, him being a builder, a huge billionaire builder, leads me to believe there has to be connections. So basically, we don't have time to get into it right now. We only have a minute and a half. But let's see if we can present a really good show next week or the week after on what you can find out about Donald Trump. Just your thoughts in the last minute.
As I said, most high-degree Freemasons in their websites, in their publications, have said over and over again in the last few months that Donald Trump is not a Freemason. Of course, there is no evidence that he is, but I have evidence that a lot of Freemasons work with him and work closely with him on advising him. So I think that it's not really a matter if he's a Freemason or not, but if he is siding with the good side of Freemasonry, that at this moment of time is openly accusing George Soros and the New World Order and those lodges that support all this to conspire against humanity. And this has never happened before, you see. So now it's not only Leo Zagami, but it's a bunch of people that are coming together. The fact that we did a Grand Lodge meeting officially, presiding over this meeting and I was able to witness myself how the Grand Master followed my advice, and this is happening also on the 17th of December. I was in Romania, where I was the first one to actually break to them the problem of the infiltrations of Satanism and mafia in Freemasonry.
All right, Leo, I'm going to have to cut you off right there. We're all out of time, but let's talk next week more about Trump and all of these, and George Soros, okay? All right.
Absolutely, and we should go deep into the fact that Donald J. Trump is actually truly in what he's doing a real Freemason.
All out of time, Leo. See you next week. Goodbye.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.